Alrighty, there we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to get started very shortly. Thanks for being patient. Just trying to fix up my camera. 1 second. Mhm. Testing. Alrighty, I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty with my camera, but I'll just try to power through it. And we can get started in about a minute or so. Alrighty, I think now is a great time to start. So, hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to our Mind Out Loud August workshop. I'm super excited to have you all here so that we can get down and dirty talking about resumes. So yeah, let me just go ahead and share my slides and then we can get started. I'm also going to turn off my video just because I'm experiencing a little bit of a lag, but don't fret, I promise I'm still here. Alrighty, perfect, perfect. There we go. So, just a little introduction for those of you guys who may or may not know me. I'm Brianna. I'm the Outreach Programs Assistant for Mind Out Loud, and today we're going to be diving in on the anatomy of a resume and a few techniques that you students, even if you're a past student rep or looking to be a student rep this upcoming school year, how you can sort of optimize your resume to put you in a good place for whatever you're using it for, whether that be, job interviews, internships, college applications, etc. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. Alrighty. So, like I said, my name is Brianna Carnegie. I recently got my MPH last semester in May. So super excited about that. I'm 24 years old and currently based in New York City, and this is my third year with Mind Out Loud. Super excited for this upcoming school year to see what we have cooking for Mind Out Loud. And speaking of cooking, a few fun facts about myself are that I love baking. I really do enjoy reading a good psychological thriller. And I also really do love trying out fermented foods. So whether that be like kimchi, kombucha, a nice probiotic soda, I just love it. And plus it's gut healthy for you. So yeah, that's also an added plus. Alrighty. So getting into the nitty-gritty, one thing that I feel like people don't really think about is sort of what the purpose of a resume is. So when you really do think about it, the essentially the main purpose why you are, sort of using this resume is to obtain an interview. And hopefully most viewers of this workshop likely already have some version of a resume. Maybe you're that type of person that updates it pretty frequently, or even if you don't and you just need a refresher on, sort of what I can add to my resume to make myself a top applicant. Essentially that's what this workshop is here for. And like I mentioned before, a resume, it's required for job applications, college applications, internships, fellowships, etc. Essentially whatever walk of life you see yourself entering in the future. So regardless of what your current situation is, you're always going to need a resume. So whether you're planning on applying to college immediately after high school graduation, or if you want to, sort of take a break and look for a job as well, it's important to have a resume. Even if you want to, enroll in the army, it's always great to have a good resume so that you can showcase your skills, experiences, accomplishments, and other characteristics that make you a good applicant. So if you don't already have a resume, you might be wondering, sort of what can I do to get started? So for starters, you're definitely going to need a Microsoft Word document, preferably in the DOC format. I know the DOCX format also works as well, but there are a few compatibility problems with that. So do proceed with caution. And if you don't have access to Microsoft Word, because I knew that it is not free and not all institutions offer it, unfortunately. You can also use Google Docs, but I do find that, Microsoft Word has worked best for me just due to the, amount of templates that they have, and it's also super easy to format it. Additionally, most resumes are also one page long. There are certain situations where it does go over this. I know in academia, like I mentioned before, I just finished my master's degree. It was pretty common to see these things called CVs or curriculum vitae, which are sort of your whole rap sheet of everything that you've done, at your institution, depending on what your certain field is. And it's very common for CVs to be longer than 2 pages, but in most cases, your resume is just going to be one page long. It also should have a very consistent formatting and style in regards to font, and margins. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about font later. If you want, you can bold key information. That's what I like to do in my resume. And we also have a sample that we're going to be going through a little bit later in the workshop. And be sure to include relevant information that you want your employer or, sort of internship supervisor to potentially know about you. So no fluff. And of course, nothing that's, of course, inappropriate for someone looking at your resume to be knowing. So A few key components of a strong resume, or even just a resume in general, definitely includes some contact information. Again, I'm going to be going through a sample a little bit later to talk a little bit more about what this can look like. You should also include a professional summary. I know that most people, or some people rather, don't always include a professional summary, but I feel like it does really give a good overview of your experience and goals, and it sort of serves as a mini or a very concise version of a cover letter. So I like to include that on my resume. The most important part is definitely your experience. So in this case, you might be highlighting your role and contributions in Mind Out Loud as a student rep, student supporter, or even as a Mind Out Loud student director. So we can talk a little bit more about how you can highlight those experiences to really get the most bang for your buck out of your resume. You can also try to highlight skills that you might have been able to develop in your Mind Out Loud, or even in other experiences as well, obviously. Whether that be leadership, communication, project management, peer support, advocacy, etc. Most people also include their education up there. So if you want to go ahead and throw what high school you went to, that's certainly, preferred. You can definitely do that. Some people also choose to put some coursework that they've taken in their resume as well. And there are other additional sections that you can include in your resume if you do find them to be relevant or beneficial to include. But if you sort of don't have anything to add to these sections, it's definitely optional. So that can be volunteer work, certifications, whether you have any technical experience in certain coding languages, etc. To the next slide. Okay. So as you can see here, this is a sample of a resume that I just threw together. And of course, all of this information is fabricated, as I'm definitely not currently a student in New York City STEM High School in Borough State, right? So as you can see at the top and bolded, in all capital letters is my first name. And this just essentially has to be the most prominent part of your resume. And as you can see, there's also the location listed here. It definitely used to be, at least when I first created my resume back in high school, it was definitely standard practice to include your full address in your resume. But as of late, essentially people have only included city and state, so there's definitely not a need to have your full address in there. You can also put your phone number that you can be reached at if they, love you and want to know more about you. We always know that. And then, of course, an email address. And one thing that I will say is that make sure you have a professional email address. So it can be something along the lines of first name, last name at gmail.com. Sort of maybe your first initial and your last name with a series of number at Gmail, Yahoo, essentially whatever type of mail server that you like. But for resumes, you definitely don't want to use your email that you've been had since middle school. So whether it's like smileybribri@yahoo.com, definitely not that. You want it to be professional so that if they contact you, they're sort of not looking at your resume like, why would they put that there? Moving on to the objective, I spoke about this a little bit before, but essentially this is just a brief statement summarizing your career goals and how you aim to contribute to the organization or role, depending on, what role that you're applying for. And again, you really do want it to be specific to what you're hoping to gain. So in this example, you can see that Brianna is a motivated high school student interested in mental health advocacy, and their main purpose for submitting their resume is to get an internship at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And you also want to keep it pretty concise, no more than 1 to 2 sentences. I feel like with resumes, I definitely struggle to keep it, concise, but you definitely want the objective or your professional summary, whatever you call it, to be very short and concise, not too much, because that's the whole point of having the experience up there. And for this education section here, you can include your school name and location. I know some people leave the location out. It's really, up to you. When you plan to graduate, so you can say sort of expected or anticipating graduation date 2024. This just lets the person that's reading your resume know when you'll be available for future opportunities. I find that to be super important. And this is also optional, like I mentioned before, but if you want to include any relevant coursework that may be relevant to the sort of role or organization that you're applying to, that can certainly help as well. So as you can see, this student here, they've taken, a couple of AP classes, honor class, and it looks good on a resume and it sort of lets the employer know that, you're hardworking, you're really trying to put yourself out there and, grind as much as you can. And I know that some people also put their, excuse me, their GPA on their resume. I know for my professional resume, just because I feel like I'm a little bit older, I don't include my GPA on my resume, but if it's strong and relevant, you can certainly put it up there. Again, certainly not required, but it does add a nice little touch to be like, wow, they are a high performing student. Alrighty. So diving into a couple of other, like small things to keep in mind about your resume. I really wanted to touch a little bit on, names and pronouns and sort of what the best practices are for resume. Um, of course, if you have some people that sort of use more than one name, or they might have their like legal name and then their preferred name. But when it comes to documents that are more confidential, like background checks, tax forms, social security, payroll, etc. For these, obviously you have to use your legal name just for legal purposes. But when it comes to like a resume, which is a little bit more, I guess you could say informal, where they're not really going to confirm what your actual name is. You can definitely use your preferred name on your resume and cover letter to, of course, reflect how you wish to be addressed. So as you can see by this example right here, hold on, let me get the pointer. Um, as you can see by this right here, you can put Jennifer AJ Smith if AJ is, more identifies with how you want to be, identified. And if you had someone with a more, ethnic name, and if you have a name that you're usually addressed by, again, you just can just go ahead and put that in the middle of what your, sort of legal name is, just for clarification purposes. And going forward, they know that if, Shuyu wants to be called Jennifer, they know that. And of course, if you're using a preferred name, you can definitely include your legal name as well, especially when it comes to cover letters. So if AJ is your nickname, you can go by AJ Smith, and then you can just put in parentheses, that is my preferred name, but my legal name is Jennifer Smith. So let me just erase this and go to the next slide. Alrighty. Um, and when it comes to pronouns, you can absolutely include this on a resume. So you can say something along the lines of Jennifer Jones, she, hers, or Jennifer Jones, she, they, of course, whatever you identify as. Um, and there is also an option to share pronouns in cover letters if it's not listed on the resume. I feel like these, sort of definitely aren't all inclusive, obviously, but these are just a few examples, of course. And I just want to share like an example, like on my LinkedIn profile, I have my pronouns listed here in addition to on my resume. And I just feel like having pronouns on your resume can definitely help eliminate any misgendering, especially if you have any anxiety regarding, being misgendered. It can help you take a step towards inclusivity and, of course, definitely help you find an inclusive workplace that respects your name and pronouns and, of course, what you want to be identified as. So on to the next slide. We're going to be now talking about how you can showcase your work experience and volunteer activities and the best way to do this. So why is it important to sort of demonstrate work experience and volunteering on your resume? I feel like it definitely highlights your dedication to certain causes or areas of interest, such as mental health advocacy. So, for example, if someone was to see that you were a Mind Out Loud student rep for 2 years and the student director for 1 year, they might really be like, wow, Brianna is really dedicated to mental health advocacy, I feel like it also provides a tangible examples of what you've developed and applied in terms of skills such as leadership, communication, and teamwork. I feel like it's definitely really normal to sort of be in a place where you might not be, an expert at one thing at this point in your life. But just showing that you're really trying to develop those skills is super important and it will show off when you're crafting your resume. And you can also have the opportunity to show real world impact and show how your contributions have made a difference in your community or organization, whether that be on a smaller or local scale, or if you've really been putting in work on a global or national scale, if that applies to you at this point in time. So when it comes to structuring your resume and specifically your work and volunteer work on your resume, you definitely want to start with your role and position, so whether that's student rep, volunteer, student supporter, student director, etc. And it's also very important to put the name of the organization where you've worked or volunteered. And one note about that is you definitely want to put the full name and not just an abbreviation. So, excuse me. So for Mind Out Loud, you would not want to put MOL. You'd want to put Mind Out Loud, spell it out, and make sure that you have the proper grammar and capitalization of the organization that you're choosing to list. You can also include the location, so the city and state, or if that doesn't apply because the role was remote, you can absolutely put that too. And I find one of the most important elements of, sort of a resume is the date. So you definitely want to put the duration of your involvement. So when you started, so for example, if you started in September of 2022, to present. And I think this is especially important when it comes to when certain jobs or organizations run background checks. They definitely want to make sure that the dates that you're listing on your resume match up with what they're able to pull from their own databases. So moving on to key responsibilities, which are those bullet points that you often see on resumes. You sort of use those to just list your main duties and achievements. And with these, you typically start off with strong action verbs, whether that be led, organized, coordinated, performed, stuff of that sort. And it's also pretty common to also see people including different outcomes and contributions that they've been able to add to their organization. So in this one, you can see that this example, it says that they increased event participation by 30%. And I'll go a little bit more into detail on the anatomy of a good bullet point in a slide or two. Alrighty. So when it comes to making a good bullet point on a resume, it really does come down to a science. At least that's the way that I like to describe it. So you really want to think about, did you quantify your experience? Did you measure your impact? And did you add context to your resume for greater impact? So I'll just go through these one by one so that you know what I'm talking about. So when I say, did you quantify your experience? I mean, did you sort of, show the impact of your work by using numbers to illustrate the scale of your work? So, for example, if you served a number of clients or if you were able to distribute something to an amount of students, were you able to, sort of add a number to this so that you can show your impact a little bit more? So, if you take a look at, let me just get the pencil again. If you take a look at this right here, you can see that right here they say over 1,000 students, or over here they say over 30 students, or even down here in this individual's mental health club as a peer counselor, they were able to manage a club budget of over $5,000. So I just think that being able to show, sort of what you were able to help contribute to add value to your organization in numbers, is super important. And again, it really does add sort of that impact to your resume. Next, you want to move on into how you were able to measure your impact. So, if you improve the process or situation, sort of what did you do and by what percentage? Did you sort of save time by speeding up a certain process? How did that work? How'd you do that? Were you able to save an organization a certain amount of money, or did you help the organization, generate income? Definitely be sure to mention that as well, because, sort of, again, these numbers are really important, and being able to show what you were able to add in the context of, a certain process or situation, super important. And when I talk about adding context for greater impact, when I say that, I sort of mean, did you receive any special awards or recognitions for the work that you did? Or, were you able to get a certain manuscript or paper published? I just feel like these ones really do, give you the opportunity to speak about how you were able to add context in the not just above within your organization, but how it was able to contribute to essentially the greater good. Um, in your bullet points, you might also find it super important to talk about what if you were able to compare your current work to a previous year's work to show certain improvement or advancements, or if you were able to start a certain initiative or spearhead something, that's also super important as well. So if we take a look at this bullet point right here, you can see that the student spearheaded a mental health resource guide that was distributed to over 1,000 students. And again, just being able to implement all of these things into your bullet points really do make for a really strong resume that definitely conveys the impact that you were able to make at your organization. Alrighty. So moving on to a quick little example. Um, I just, sort of essentially made this bullet point up, but I wanted to show the different parts of this bullet point that make it really strong and really do convey, essentially what this individual was able to do. So, what did you do, or sort of what was the verb? The verb here is coordinated. And what did the verb act upon? It acted upon mental health workshops. Um, how many people were you able to help out with these workshops? Approximately 150 plus students. And, sort of why did you do this? What was the end result? And how can you measure your success? You know that this student's efforts were successful because it resulted in a 30% increase in awareness of campus resources. So when you put it all together, this is a really strong bullet point. It definitely contains all of the components of a great bullet point that we mentioned before. And if you just remember to use those, remember what I said before in terms of making a high impact bullet point, you can certainly, sort of mirror that into your own resume and endeavors and be able to strengthen your resume a bit if it isn't already strong, that is. So essentially, when you give someone your resume, and if you use those skills, you definitely want to leave your audience, which is the person reading it, saying, I clearly understood the candidate's experience and why their contributions were important. They demonstrated a very strong grasp of skills and knowledge, and you trust their expertise and qualifications. And hopefully, their achievements and experiences are so compelling that I want to learn more about them as a candidate. And you might move on to the next stage, and that be a phone interview, virtual interview. In some situations, it might be sort of an exercise or making slides or something, whatever the context is of, essentially why you're distributing this resume. So I know that was sort of a lot to go through, and you might be thinking, wow, like, do I really have to start this from scratch? Like, is there something that can help me to sort of do this so I don't have to do this all on my own? And the answer to that is yes and no. Um, there are definitely plenty of templates that can be used to help make this process of forming a resume a little bit less daunting. I will say that a pro of using a template is that it's super consistent, relatively easy to use. Most of the time, it's just a matter of essentially putting your own details in there. And most of the time as well, if you're using a certain template, typically it's tailored for specific roles, whether you're more humanities based or more technical based or whatever field you're in, really. I will say though, one con is that it may look a little generic if it's overused, and there is less of an opportunity for customization. And if there are formatting issues within the document, that might make it a little bit hard to edit on your end. But long story short, it's super important for you to customize different templates to fit your content and personality. And I'm just going to go a little bit more into sort of what a good template might look like, and essentially how you can beat something that we called the applicant tracking systems, also known as ATS. So when we really think about essentially, submitting a resume and, whether you're applying for a job, internship, whatever the case may be, it's obvious that there's going to be plenty of applicants, applying for these positions. We're just in a tough market, and that's how it is. Everybody's super talented. So a lot of organizations have in place something called ATS, or applicant tracking system, which is a software application that's used by employers to manage the recruitment process. And essentially what it does is it filters resumes based on different keywords, skills, and other criteria to identify who the potentially best candidates are. So it essentially works in, I'll say, three different ways. You have the initial screening, in which resumes are sort of scanned and ranked based on their relevance to the job description. So if you're applying for a job to be let's say a Mind Out Loud student rep, and your sort of resume, for example, matches the job description for a student rep super well, you're more likely to be picked by the ATS, for your resume to come into the ATS system. It also goes through a keyword matching sort of stage, in which the system looks for specific keywords that match the job posting, which is why you might sometimes hear that you might want to use certain elements of the job description in your resume to make it more likely that your resume will be picked up by this ATS. One thing to keep note of while crafting a resume, and if you will be submitting it online, is to be sure that you're formatting it correctly. If you're using things like non-standard formats, images, and complex layouts, that can confuse the ATS system, leading to your resume being overlooked, and we absolutely don't want that. So I'll give an example in 2 slides, but essentially, you don't want to include any formats that are obscure. Typically, I submit my resume as a PDF just because it preserves the internal formatting of the document, but if you want to submit it as a doc, that's definitely okay as well. Alrighty. So in order to optimize your resume for ATS to make sure that it essentially falls into this pool of resumes that are, highly qualified candidates, a few things that you can do include using a standard font. So you can use font like, Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman, Chicago. You don't really want to use fonts that people don't typically see often or aren't standard on most devices, because when they open up your resume, it's going to be hard for them to take a look at it. Additionally, you want to avoid images and tables. Again, you just want to keep your resume highly text-based to avoid confusing the ATS system. You also want to include keywords from the job description, and this might include mirroring the language by using terms and phrases from the job posting. But one thing that I will say is that you definitely don't want to do something called keyword stuffing, which is essentially just, sort of taking all of the relevant words and roles and responsibilities from a resume and just stuffing it in there to, make your resume seems like it's an exact match, because more than likely, sort of the ATS might pick up that, maybe this resume is a little bit too similar to what we're looking for, and it might get passed over. So you definitely want to just integrate keywords super naturally into your work experience and skill sections. Okay, so if we take a look at this image here, you can look at an ATS friendly resume, versus a not so ATS friendly resume. Excuse me. And as you can see here, the one on the left is formatted really nicely. Again, it's mostly word dense. It has the name at the top, experience section, education, and other, which includes a little bit of those sections that I mentioned prior. This is a great resume. It looks really good, and this would be super easy for the ATS to pick up on. However, when you take a look at this one on the right, it also looks like a very, compelling resume. And I will say, I actually do kind of prefer looking at this one. However, this one isn't so ATS friendly. And my reason for saying that is because it sort of has these like weird like horizontal and vertical borders here. There's an image right here. Just like different sections that aren't really within the same area of the resume, like some's on the right, some's on the left. It might be harder to read because you don't know if you're going to read like vertically or horizontally. So I say that to say that it really does come down to essentially, what field you're applying for and even, what type of what country that you go to school in. Because I know in some institutions they might prefer a more I guess you could say creative resume in which it has a headshot in it. But I just think that most of the at least for what I've looked into, most institutions or organizations are looking for something that's a little bit easier to look at. And this version here would be more likely to pass through ATS than a resume like this, even though it is a very pretty and nice resume. I will say that. So I feel like it would be super remiss to sort of talk about resumes and not really talk about, essentially if I'm applying to something, it's super hard, you might deal with rejection and, essentially how can I stay motivated in the face of all that? So I certainly wanted to talk a little bit more about that as well. Something that I will say is that, persistence pays off. I feel like in a time like now where we have super, advanced applicants where everybody's like a superstar and they're doing great things, of course it's going to be harder to sort of pick one candidate for a role if you only have one spot, right? But one thing that you definitely have to keep in mind is that rejections are super common, and at the end of the day, all you really need is one yes to sort of be golden, so you can go ahead and then accept that offer. Um, I like this little meme here because it really did sort of encompass that patience and persistence go hand in hand. I found it really cute. You might also find it helpful to use your network to get advice, referrals, and support during a job search, if that is what you're using your resume for. If you're using it for something like college admissions or internship applications, or even fellowship applications as well, I would certainly urge you to sort of use your guidance office if you're in high school or your school's career center to see, essentially what you can do to help make yourself a stronger applicant for what you're applying for. And I also, in the past, when sort of facing rejection, um, this one is sort of, I feel like I had a hard time doing it initially, but seek feedback after rejections. I feel like most people aren't going to be too, sort of like mean about it. And sometimes you honestly might not get a response. But if you want to politely ask interviewers or, sort of application reviewers, sort of essentially be like, what was wrong with my application and what can I do to improve? That's always a strong point, and you can definitely take that with you to make yourself stronger as time goes by. And if you have peers or mentors in a field that interests you or in a field that you're looking to go into, you can certainly try to share your resume with those trusted individuals for a critique. They might be able to give you some feedback on how you can, essentially beat the ATS system or how you can make your bullet points a little stronger or even format your resume so that essentially you can get more callbacks and get that role that you're looking for. I will also say that it's important to continuously update your resume. I feel like oftentimes I would go I'm not gonna lie. Um, I would go like a super long time without updating my resume, and then all of a sudden I needed to apply for something, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I haven't looked at my resume in like over a year. Like, what am I gonna do? So if you can just continuously update and refine your resume based on, sort of how your different roles and responsibilities that you're currently doing have evolved over time, that's super great. I personally like to keep a running list of everything that I'm doing in my role so that I don't forget to put it on my resume because I feel like, if you were tasked with being involved in a certain initiative, that's super important. Definitely shows responsibility. And you really do want to make sure that your resume is able to encompass that. So when looking at a few key takeaways, um, you definitely want to, sort of customize your resume for each application, and definitely align it for the specific job or opportunity that you're applying for. I will say that, again, remember the purpose of a resume is to essentially give the person reviewing it a great opportunity to look at your qualifications, experience, and essentially see how suitable you are for a job or academic opportunity or internship or again, whatever the role may be at that point. So you really do want to again, refine it as needed and tailor that content so that it's specifically aligned with what you're looking at. I will also say that, like I mentioned before, using numbers to demonstrate the scale of your work and the impact of your contributions are super, super important. I mean, it's great that you were able to, sort of increase the amount of students that might, seek a certain service within the school, but what does that mean in terms of the bigger picture? Did this mean that the school was able to get more funding? Was the school able to, sort of save money in some way by students participating in that initiative? So again, really just look at your resume in the greater scheme of things and make it so that it looks very impactful in regards to the greater picture. You also definitely want to use feedback from rejections to refine and improve your resume and approach. Again, rejection is super common. It's nothing to be, sort of scared about. It happens, that's life. And while I'm talking about sort of rejection and stuff, I will also say that, comparison is a thief of joy, and I've heard that statement many, many, many times throughout my career to this point. If you see someone who has like a great job and you sort of want to be that person or you aspire to get a job like them or you're sort of like wow, why can't that be me, and you're feeling some sort of like imposter syndrome of some sort, just remember that essentially you don't have to compare yourself to other people. It's you versus you, and everything will come in due time if it's meant for you. Strong believer in that. So don't fret. Just keep, trying at it, submitting your resume, refining it based on feedback, and I promise you'll get to where you want to be. Before I end this webinar, I just wanted to talk about this app right here called Blink. I'm not sure if you guys frequently go to sort of like job fairs or career fairs. Um, Oftentimes if I, sort of ran out of a business card or if I'm just, chatting with somebody and I want to connect with them on LinkedIn, I use this app called Blink and I'll put Blink in the chat. That's Blink with a Q. Um, and essentially it is a virtual business card. You can add the widget on your phone so that it's always accessible. It's a QR code, and it's just a matter of somebody scanning it. And once they scan it, they can have access to your LinkedIn, your, sort of phone number, email, website. You can essentially put your whole professional profile up there. It's really cool, and I found it really useful to excuse me, to sort of have to give to people, whether I'm at like a conference or a job fair, or whatever the event is. And yeah, it's just a super great resource to sort of network, especially if you're just starting out and you just want to make a profile so that people, know who you are. Alrighty, so that is it for the presentation. Thank you guys so much for, joining. I'll just wait to see if anybody has any questions, but if not, um, I can just go ahead and end. So I'm just gonna stop sharing 1 second. And puts my camera back on. That's now not lagging. So if there are any questions, feel free to add those in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them. I'll just give it a few minutes just in case attendees want to um think of questions to ask me. Alrighty. Well, it looks like there are no questions, so I will just say to everyone that was able to join, thank you so much. If you're watching this asynchronously, like if this is posted online, I hope you were able to learn something. I'll just go ahead and put my email in the chat just in case you had any additional questions. There we go. So there's my email. But yes. Again, thank you so much for joining. We really do appreciate it here at Mind Out Loud. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's also my it's just my name, which is in my email. And yeah. So thank you for joining us for our Mind Out Loud August workshop. I hope that you were able to take something away from this resume building workshop with a little exercise. And yes, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, morning, evening, not too matters where you are. So take care and I look to seeing you soon. Thanks. Bye.